What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today, we're talking must-own handcuffs for the 2019 fantasy football season. Before we deep dive that, however, another quick reminder, if you haven't gotten yourself a copy of the 2019 ADP Fantasy Football Draft Guide, go ahead, do just that. Great value, everything you need. Check out the description box, but for now, let's get into this breakdown. When it comes to running back handcuffs in fantasy football, I feel like it's a strategy that not enough people utilize. And look, to some extent, I understand the knock against it because essentially you might be drafting a guy that doesn't have a single week of fantasy viable production. And maybe more importantly is that you're limiting the number of active bench spots that you have. So maybe your league mates have 5, whereas you all of a sudden now have 4. But guess what? The pros outweigh the cons here, folks, because essentially you're investing in the ultimate insurance policy. That's how you have to think about it. And it happens every single year. And last year we had so many examples and none bigger than Le'Veon Bell, because leading up to the season, we knew that there were contract disputes and that Bell might sit out a game or two. And we knew that James Conner was the clear-cut backup on a fantasy potent offense and that his price tag wasn't that high. You could have him easily in the later rounds. Yet, so many people bewilderingly did not draft James Conner with Le'Veon Bell, and I just don't understand that. And we obviously know how that played out, because if that was you, well, you essentially wasted a first or second round pick wherever you got Le'Veon Bell. And he wasn't the only example. It happened with Melvin Gordon and Joe Mixon, obviously not for as long of an extended period of time. It happened with Devonta Freeman. It happened with a guy like Kareem Hunt, even though his situation was, unique, as in it was an injury and it was him getting cut from the team. But the point is, it's going to be something that happens every single year, as unfortunate as it is. And you don't want to find yourself in that situation. You don't want to be the person that's looking for an RB1 replacement when fantasy playoffs hit. You don't want to be in a situation where you're scrambling the waiver wire or you're praying that you didn't use up all of your fab budget so you can get that backup now before it's too late. And on top of this, look, if you're worried that, well, what does that mean? Now, all of a sudden, I have to handcuff every single running back that I draft? No, that's not the case. Because the targets here that we're going to be talking about are upper echelon, elite running backs. Guys that you get in the first, second round, maybe third round, but that might be a stretch. And honestly, the list isn't as long as you think, because not every elite running back has a fantasy viable backup that you can plug in and still get RB1 production from. Because Saquon Barkley, Ezekiel Elliott, Christian McCaffrey, they don't have those guys, but whereas an Alvin Kamara does, whereas a Melvin Gordon does. And speaking of Alvin Kamara, that's who I want to start with here, because his situation is an interesting one. When it comes to Kamara, the situation is a unique one because for the last 2 years, it's been Kamara and Mark Ingram, who obviously this year has been replaced by Latavius Murray. But the fact remains, these last 2 years, both Kamara and Ingram were putting together fantasy relevant performances without Kamara being injured. So that's not the typical handcuff scenario. And that's why Latavius Murray is even more valuable, because Alvin Kamara is a top 4 pick across all formats. In some situations, I've even seen him be the first pick overall. And compared to the other 3 guys in Zeke, Barkley, and McCaffrey, no one else has a clear-cut backup running back that will be getting you RB1 production without a doubt if the primary guy goes down. And I realize, look, maybe you might have to spend a little bit of an earlier pick on Latavius Murray than you would like to go ahead and insure him. And again, it's not a typical handcuff situation, because Latavius Murray will get you fantasy relevant weeks from time to time, and you can make the case that he could be a starter. But that's what makes him even more valuable in my eyes. Now, obviously, I wouldn't go ahead and draft him extremely early on, because, when it comes to handcuffs, these are guys that you should be getting in the later rounds. Otherwise, it kind of defeats the purpose of drafting a handcuff when you can have someone else, another starting running back instead, or another top-notch wide receiver, or tight end, or whatever other positional player But the fact remains is, me personally, if I'm in a situation where I draft Alvin Kamara, I know he's going to be, with those other 3 running backs, the top 4 fantasy producers. And if I can go ahead and get his insurance policy in Latavius Murray, I'm going to go ahead and do it. I know I might leave some fantasy points on the bench throughout the season, but I'd rather go ahead and risk that instead of be left scrambling for RB1 replacement in Alvin Kamara later on in the season. Next on this list are Malcolm Brown and Darrell Henderson, obviously the 2 backups to Todd Gurley. And I feel like I have to mention them here, even though we still don't know what the situation with Gurley is. But a lot of people are still drafting Todd Gurley at the end of the 1st round, some point in the 2nd round. I myself, if I had the chance to at the end of the 2nd round, would absolutely take Todd Gurley there if he was available. But at the same time, I would back him up with Darrell Henderson. That's, again, me specifically. We don't know who's going to win out. We kind of need the preseason to see if Malcolm Brown or Henderson is the preferred option. But if Todd Gurley doesn't, in fact, play, this could end up being Le'Veon Bell 2.0. So for all those people that were in that situation last year and drafted Le'Veon Bell, don't do the same mistake again, because later on in the season, you know, with a week or 2 to go before week 1, we're gonna have a good idea of who the preferred option for the Rams is, whether it's Brown, whether it's Henderson. Again, I think it'll be Henderson if I had to put money in it right now, because he's younger. I mean, the Rams used an early pick on him. You know, he had a bunch of hype surrounding his name, great college performances, so that's why I think it'll be Henderson. But the fact remains, if the worst case scenario for Todd Gurley unfolds and you drafted him, absolutely make sure that you grab either Brown or Henderson. And honestly, that's the only way I advise drafting Todd Gurley at this point in time. If you don't plan on drafting his backup, whether it's Brown or Henderson, you have no business drafting Todd Gurley at all. Continuing on, we have got Austin Ekeler next. And with Ekeler, we've seen his value even without Gordon being hurt as a guy that you can plug in as a running back 2 or a flex guy in PPR formats, that is, when you need some help or when you need a long shot, and him deliver some success. But the fact remains is, we've seen it. When Melvin Gordon gets hurt, Ekeler is the next man up. A lot of people have talked about Justin Jackson, but I do think it'll be Austin Ekeler. I think he's the more complete running back. We've seen the Chargers have success with him in the past. We saw him, handle the load before he got hurt in 2018, and he was doing it effectively. So for that reason, I'd go ahead, draft Melvin Gordon, no problem whatsoever with that, but absolutely get Austin Ekeler. He is a running back 1 if he is the primary guy on an offense that is very potent as well in the LA Chargers. Next, we have got Gio Bernard. And Bernard is a guy that I absolutely love as a low-key handcuff that nobody seems to talk about any year. And Joe Mixon is a guy that's getting higher and higher on people's draft boards. He's a top 10 running back, no questions about it. He's so valuable for what the Bengals do offensively. And the scary part is Gio Bernard is a better pass catcher. So to some extent, he's got maybe a higher ceiling, especially in PPR leagues, if Joe Mixon is hurt. We saw it last year. It might have only been for 2-3 games, but when Joe Mixon wasn't on the field, Bernard was getting incredible usage. He was getting usage as a pure rusher. He was getting a bunch of passes thrown to him as well, and he was putting RB1 numbers, 20 plus points pretty much every single time he started for Joe Mixon. And you can have him potentially picked up after the conclusion of your drafts. That's how much people are undervaluing him. He could potentially be the last pick in your draft and still be available. So if you have Joe Mixon, absolutely do yourself a favor. Back him up with Gio Bernard, who, if Mixon wasn't there, he would be an RB1. Continuing on, we have got Jaylen Samuels, who more and more reports recently are saying that he might end up with more carries than people expect. Now, either way, James Conner will still be the head honcho. He'll still be either an end of the first round or early second round RB selection. But Jaylen Samuels carries a lot of value as a pass catcher. And I do think you're also going to see him in some rushing opportunities as well. We saw him have success last year when Conner got nicked up. You can make the argument that he's a better pass catcher than James Conner even. We saw him even be designated as a tight end in 2018. Now, I don't think that's going to happen again in 2019. We can only hope. But again, with Jaylen Samuels, I liken it to a Gio Bernard situation. He's a good pass catcher. He's on an offense that's probably a little bit more potent. He's going to be going earlier in drafts than Gio Bernard. But Jaylen Samuels is a guy that if I have James Conner, I'm getting Samuels as well. He could end up being a bigger part of that offense in Pittsburgh than most expect, even while James Conner is healthy. Getting to the last really elite handcuff name on this list, we have Ito Smith of the Falcons. And Smith is a guy that I'm very high on for a variety of reasons. Now, let's look at the Devonta Freeman situation, because obviously Freeman for the last 2 years hasn't really played at all. He's dealt with a number of different injuries, and a lot of people expect the same to happen in 2019, which obviously shows you how valuable Ito Smith would be. With Coleman gone, it's Ito Smith's show as the RB2 in Atlanta, and that's an offense that I've been on record saying will be the best offense in the NFL. It's got an upgraded offensive line. Ito Smith has skills as a pass catcher, as a pure rusher. So I think he's basically Coleman 2.0. And while Coleman was there for the Falcons, you can make the argument that he was the most valuable handcuff in all of fantasy football. And I do think Ito Smith makes a nice transition to that role. If Devonta Freeman, who right now is right around a third round selection, but has top 15 running back upside if he stays healthy, if he does get hurt, then Ito Smith is the clear-cut choice for the next man up in Atlanta. And he is a guy that if you have Devonta Freeman, considering how big of an injury risk he is, you should 100% have Ito Smith as well. So with that, we conclude this overview of the top fantasy handcuff names to know. Now, like I promised you guys, it wasn't that long of a list, right around 6 names. And I specifically stopped there because there's a couple other guys that I could mention, like a Jamal Williams or a Rashad Penny, but their situation is a little bit different because the guys that they're backing up, Aaron Jones or Chris Carson, they're 4th round picks. You know, they're later on, and for that reason, it's not a prototypical handcuff. Or maybe it is. It's just not as to an elite level as the guys that were mentioned before. So me personally, if I go ahead and draft either Aaron Jones or Chris Carson, I'd still more than likely take a shot on one of these backups, because again, I'd like to go ahead and ensure myself moving forward. Obviously, it comes down to how you feel about Aaron Jones and Chris Carson and what you think their real value is. But just a couple names to throw out there additionally for you guys to keep in mind. But other than that, let me know what questions you guys might or might not have. Do you agree with the whole handcuffing strategy? Why or why not? Are there guys on this list that you agree, disagree with? Is there someone that I should have included? And also any other fantasy related questions you guys might have, let me hear it in the comment section. And as always, if you enjoyed, make sure to like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in future videos.